Back in the 80s, this is what they thought 2015 would look like.
You won't believe what slipped past the editors of Back to the Future. Hidden in one of the movie's most famous scenes is a mistake so big it should have been impossible to miss. Yet it stayed in the final cut for the world to see. This scene isn't edited, it isn't fixed, and once you spot it, you'll never watch the film the same way again. Let's take a closer look at this unforgettable blooper. The birth of a time-traveling classic. Back to the Future was not just a movie. It was a dream that started in 1980 when two friends, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, sat together and asked a simple question. What if you could go back in time and meet your parents when they were young? That single thought became the seed for a story that would change Hollywood forever. When they started taking the script around to studios, the response was nothing but cold doors shutting in their faces. Over 40 studios said no. The main reason was not because the story was bad, but because it was not raunchy enough. At that time, Hollywood comedies were filled with adult jokes and over-the-top content. Things changed only after Robert Zemeckis directed Romancing the Stone in 1984, which turned into a hit. Suddenly, Zemeckis was no longer the struggling filmmaker being turned down. He was the man who had proven he could deliver a box office success. That is when Universal Pictures finally gave Back to the Future the green light. But getting a studio on board was only the first challenge. Casting became another uphill battle. From the start, Zemeckis and Gale wanted Michael J. Fox to play Marty McFly. He had the right mix of charm, wit, and youthful energy. The problem was that Fox was already busy with his TV show Family Ties, and the producers of the show refused to release him. With no other option, the role went to Eric Stoltz. For a few weeks, production moved forward with Stoltz as Marty. Yet, something did not feel right. He was a good actor, but he was not bringing the lightness and humor the character needed. Marty McFly was supposed to be fun, relatable, and slightly mischievous, and Stoltz was playing him too seriously. After a difficult decision, Zemeckis decided to recast the role, even though it meant reshooting weeks of work and spending millions more. By April 1985, filming wrapped up, but the challenges were far from over. The release date had been set for July 3rd, just in time for the summer crowd. That left a very tight window for editing and special effects. Some effects were not fully polished by the time it hit theaters, but the audience did not seem to care. The response was explosive. Back to the Future earned $381.1 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing film of 1985. Critics loved it, families adored it, and teenagers found in Marty McFly a character they could look up to. The film's theme song, The Power of Love by Huey Lewis and the News, became a chart-topping hit, and the DeLorean time machine entered pop culture as one of the most iconic vehicles in movie history. Years passed, and the love for the film only grew stronger. In 2007, the U.S. Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry, cementing it as not just entertainment, but a piece of American cultural history. Few films reach that kind of legacy. Back to the Future was not just a blockbuster of its time, it became a timeless story that spoke to generations. Yet, as perfect as it seemed on the screen, the journey behind it was far from smooth. Casting changes, endless rejections, and sleepless nights shaped the film we now see as flawless. And while audiences were laughing, cheering, and quoting lines from Marty and Doc, there was something brewing off-screen that would soon make Hollywood history in its own way. Let me tell you about the actor whose absence led to one of Hollywood's strangest and most bitter legal battles. Faces, lawsuits, and Hollywood's identity crisis. For many fans of Back to the Future, George McFly was a character they instantly recognized. Played by Crispin Glover, George was awkward, nervous, and yet somehow lovable. His transformation from a timid man to someone who stood up for himself was one of the most satisfying parts of the first film. Glover's performance brought humor and heart to the story, making George an important piece of Marty McFly's journey. But when Back to the Future Part 2 arrived in 1989, something was off. George McFly was still there, yet something about him looked strangely unnatural. Audiences at the time may not have noticed it immediately, but what they were actually seeing was not Crispin Glover at all. It was another actor, Jeffrey Weissman, wearing prosthetics that had been created from a mold of Glover's face. At first, many assumed that Glover had refused to return for the sequel, but the truth was more complicated. Glover later explained that he had wanted to come back, but he was offered much less money than other cast members. On top of that, he had strong creative disagreements with the filmmakers about the story. In particular, he disliked the ending of the first movie, where Marty comes back to a better life with a nicer house and car. Glover felt it sent the wrong message, suggesting that money equals happiness. When negotiations fell apart, the producers decided to move forward without him. But instead of hiring a different actor and leaving it at that, they chose a path that would change Hollywood forever. Using the face mold they already had of Glover from the first film, they applied it to Weissman and tried to pass him off as the same George McFly. When Glover discovered this, he was furious. He did not object to the idea of someone else playing the role. What bothered him deeply was that his face was being used without his consent. In his own words, had they only hired another actor, that would have been totally legal, and I would have been completely fine with that. But using his likeness crossed a line. So Glover took action. He sued the filmmakers, and the case eventually settled. The legal battle forced Hollywood to confront an issue that had not been clearly addressed before. Who owns an actor's face? Can a studio use your likeness once you have left a project? Where does creative freedom end and personal rights begin? The case had a lasting impact. After Glover's lawsuit, contracts for actors began to change. Studios started including detailed clauses about how an actor's image and likeness could be used. What happened with George McFly in Back to the Future 2 became a turning point that still shapes the entertainment industry today. And the timing of it all feels even more important now. In the modern world of digital effects, artificial intelligence, and deepfakes, the question of likeness rights is everywhere. If studios can digitally recreate someone's face, or even bring back actors who have passed away, what rules should protect performers? Crispin Glover's fight back in the late 1980s was not just about one role. It was about drawing a line that is still being debated in Hollywood more than 3 decades later.
What are you writing? Stories. Science fiction stories about, visitors.
Looking back, the controversy shows how even the most beloved films can have a darker side. Behind the laughs, the sci-fi wonder, and the family fun, there were real struggles about fairness and respect. For Glover, the decision to replicate his face without permission was not just a creative choice. It was personal. And for Hollywood, it was a wake-up call that technology could be powerful, but it also needed limits. While lawyers fought over faces, Michael J. Fox was busy transforming himself with an endless list of surprising new talents. Let's tell its details. The reluctant master of 1,000 skills. When people think of Back to the Future, they remember Michael J. Fox racing on his skateboard, rocking out on stage, or confidently pulling off stunts that made Marty McFly one of the coolest characters of the 1980s. What many don't realize is that Fox had to learn nearly all of those skills from scratch. He was not just showing up to deliver lines, he was committing himself to making Marty look like someone who could do it all. Fox once joked, "It seems like I was always in school," and that wasn't far from the truth. Between long filming schedules, his television work on Family Ties, and the demands of the trilogy, he was constantly training in something new. One day it was skateboarding lessons. Another day, it was practicing with a guitar. Later, it was riding horses or learning how to handle guns. He did not want to fake it for the camera. He wanted it to feel real. One of the best examples of his dedication came in the famous school dance scene. Marty steps onto the stage and launches into Johnny B. Good, shocking the 1950s audience with a performance that feels decades ahead of its time. To make this moment believable, Fox worked with guitar teacher Paul Hansen, who broke down the solo piece by piece. Even though the music had already been recorded, Fox learned it note for note, so that his fingers matched perfectly with the sound. The guitar solo alone was not enough. Fox also studied the moves of classic rock stars to make his performance look authentic. He practiced jumps, slides, and kicks until they became second nature. Then he worked with a choreographer to blend those movements into a sequence that captured the spirit of rock and roll. When he finally performed it on set, the result was unforgettable. Fans cheered, critics praised it, and decades later, it is still one of the most celebrated moments of the trilogy. But the guitar was just one of many challenges. For the first movie, Fox had to master skateboarding. At the time, skateboarding was still seen as a street activity for kids, not something polished for film. To pull off the stunts, he worked with experts, pushing himself to ride and balance with ease. By the time the cameras rolled, he looked as if he had been skating for years. In Back to the Future Part 3, Fox had to take on completely different skills. The story moved to the Old West, and that meant horses, lassos, and guns. Once again, he trained hard to look convincing. Whether he was galloping across the dusty set or holding a weapon in a tense standoff, Fox's preparation made it feel natural. What is striking about his effort is how much of it he later admitted to forgetting. He laughed about it, saying he picked up 1,000,000 different skills, but could no longer do most of them. That only highlights how demanding the experience was. He wasn't learning these things for life. He was learning them in short bursts, under pressure, and then moving on to the next challenge. The filmmakers also pushed technology to its limits in order to support Fox's performance. In later films, Marty had to interact with himself in different versions across timelines. That required Michael J. Fox to appear on screen as multiple characters in the same scene. To make this possible, the team at Industrial Light and Magic created a new device called the VistaGlide, a robotic motion-controlled camera. It allowed scenes with two Martys to look seamless, even as the camera moved naturally. This innovation showed just how far the filmmakers were willing to go to capture Fox's vision of the character. When you put it all together, Fox's journey as Marty McFly was more than acting. It was a crash course in music, sports, and stunts, supported by groundbreaking technology. He gave everything he had to make Marty believable, and audiences rewarded him with lifelong admiration. Still, for all perfection, even Michael J. Fox's brilliance could not keep every slip from sneaking into the movie. One particular mistake survived editing, and once you spot it, you can never unsee it. The bloopers that slipped through time. For all its polish, Back to the Future was not a perfect film. Even with brilliant acting, creative writing, and groundbreaking effects, little mistakes slipped through the cracks. Most audiences never noticed them during their first watch, but eagle-eyed fans eventually started spotting bloopers that became part of the movie's charm. These weren't big enough to ruin the story, yet once you see them, you cannot unsee them. One of the most famous examples comes from the video scene. In the story, Marty shows the 1955 version of Doc Brown, a tape recording from the future. On the video, Doc is seen explaining time travel and saying the words, "Never mind that now." But here's the strange part. When Marty was originally filming that recording in 1985, the camera was hanging down by his side and not actually pointed at Doc. There was no way that line could have been captured on film. Yet, when it plays back for the younger Doc, it is there, clear as day. The continuity is completely off, but because the moment is so dramatic, audiences rarely questioned it. Once fans caught on, though, it became one of the most discussed bloopers in the trilogy. Another slip happens with the flyer that reads, "Save the Clock Tower." Marty first gets this flyer from a woman who is campaigning to preserve the Hill Valley Courthouse clock. Later, Jennifer writes a love note on the back of it.
Here, let me give you the number.
And Marty carries it around as a reminder. But if you pay close attention, you will see that the flyer changes appearance throughout the film. In some scenes, it looks brand new and smooth. In others, it appears wrinkled and worn. At one point, when the woman first hands it to Marty, Jennifer's writing is already visible on the back, even though she hasn't written it yet. These little details were missed during editing, but fans who rewatch the movie notice them almost immediately. Then, there is the curious case of the background extra who seems to be trapped in a loop. In the Save the Clock Tower scene, you can spot the same man walking around a corner more than once, moving in the same direction. It is as if he is walking in circles while the story unfolds. This kind of repetition is a classic continuity error, but in the world of Back to the Future, it almost feels like a playful nod to time travel itself. There are plenty of other tiny mistakes sprinkled across the trilogy. A hand turning the pages of a phone book clearly belongs to someone much older than Marty. A remote control shows 0 volts, but still manages to operate the DeLorean. Lighting changes within the same hallway scene. None of these were intentional, yet they have become fun treasures for fans to point out. Instead of making the movies look sloppy, they add to the sense that even in a story about time machines and paradoxes, the smallest details can feel unpredictable. What makes these bloopers so memorable is not just the fact that they happened, but the way they have been embraced. For some fans, catching these errors is part of the fun of rewatching the films. It is like being part of a secret club, where you get to notice things most casual viewers miss. Online forums and fan discussions are filled with lists of these small mistakes, and people often argue over which one is the most glaring. In a way, the mistakes humanize the films. They remind us that behind the iconic characters and high-tech gadgets, Back to the Future was still made by people working under pressure. Tight deadlines, late-night shoots, and quick edits meant some errors were bound to slip through. Instead of taking away from the experience, those errors add layers to the movie's legacy. They show that even a blockbuster this successful was not immune to human error. Perhaps that is why these bloopers have become cult favorites. They are imperfections frozen in time, little cracks in the polished surface that make the film feel even more alive. Yet some of the funniest moments weren't mistakes at all, like when even the US president became the punchline of a time travel joke. When Hollywood laughed with Ronald Reagan. Back to the Future gave audiences many unforgettable lines, but one in particular carried a punch that went beyond the movie theater. It came when Marty McFly, stuck in 1955, tried to convince Doc Brown that he really was from the future. In desperation, Marty told Doc that Ronald Reagan was the president in 1985. Doc's reaction was perfect. He threw his head back in disbelief and shouted, "The actor?" The line worked because in 1955,
who's president of the United States in 1985?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, the actor?
Ronald Reagan was still known as a Hollywood performer who had starred in dozens of films. The thought of such a man becoming president seemed so outrageous that even in a science fiction movie about time travel, Doc found it impossible to believe. When the film played at the White House, Reagan reportedly laughed so hard at the line that he asked the projectionist to rewind the scene and play it again. He had no problem laughing at his own past as a Hollywood actor. If anything, the moment showed a side of him that audiences rarely got to see. The president was not just a political leader, he was also a man with a sense of humor, who could enjoy a good-natured laugh at his own expense. But Reagan's affection for Back to the Future went further than a private chuckle. In 1986, during his State of the Union address, he quoted one of the movie's most famous lines. With the world watching, he said, "Where we're going, we don't need roads." Those words belonged to Doc Brown, but in Reagan's speech, they became a symbol of optimism about the future of the United States. It was an extraordinary moment when a Hollywood science fiction film crossed into the highest level of politics. This connection between the film and the president highlighted just how deeply Back to the Future had embedded itself in American culture. It wasn't just a movie for teenagers or families looking for a fun night out. It had reached into the heart of the country and become a shared language that even the leader of the nation could use to inspire people. When a president quotes your film in one of the most important political speeches of the year, you know it has left a mark far beyond the box office. The Reagan moment also showed something else. It revealed how entertainment and politics had become more closely tied than ever before. Here was a president who had once been a Hollywood star himself, openly embracing a film that poked fun at his career. It blurred the line between cinema and reality in a way that felt almost fitting for a movie about bending the rules of time. For fans, this was the ultimate validation. If even the President of the United States was not only watching but quoting Back to the Future, then it wasn't just a popular movie, it was a piece of history. The joke about Reagan as president started as a clever script idea, but it ended up symbolizing how pop culture and politics could collide in the most surprising ways. Back to the Future reminded people that the impossible can sometimes become reality. In 1955, nobody would have believed Ronald Reagan would one day run the country. But by 1985, he was the president. And by 1986, he was quoting a time-traveling scientist in front of the world. That is the kind of cultural reach most films can only dream about. While Reagan enjoyed the laughs, another actor's experience left bruises, injuries, and even life-threatening moments on set. Pain, passion, and dangerous close calls. The magic of Back to the Future looks effortless on screen, but behind the cameras, it was a different story. The cast poured their hearts into the trilogy, often pushing themselves beyond comfort and sometimes into danger. Their passion made the films unforgettable, but it also led to bruises, close calls, and tensions that nearly derailed the journey. Even though Michael J. Fox became the face of Marty McFly, Eric Stoltz's shadow still lingers in the finished films. When the role was recast and Fox replaced him, most of Stoltz's footage was thrown out, but not all of it vanished. In the diner scene where Marty punches Biff, fans have long pointed out that the fist connecting with Biff's jaw is actually Stoltz's. Actor Thomas F. Wilson, who played Biff, later admitted, "It's my belief that Eric Stoltz's fist punches me in the 50s cafe." It is a small detail, but it reminds us how much work had already been done before the risky decision to start over. Wilson himself threw his body into the films, especially in Part 3, when the story traveled to the Old West. His character Buford Mad Dog Tannen was a rough cowboy.
Hey, what is that, some sort of Asian talk or something? I'm looking for that no-good cheating blacks.
And Wilson wanted to make sure audiences believed every moment. He spent hours learning how to ride horses and throw a lasso. The stunts you see on screen are not doubles. It was Wilson himself, mastering skills that were far outside his comfort zone. His commitment made Mad Dog Tannen both hilarious and terrifying, a villain who felt authentic in a Western setting. Christopher Lloyd also had a big first in Part 3. Known for playing the eccentric and brilliant Doc Brown, he was usually the wild-haired scientist full of energy and ideas, but in the third movie, the writers gave him something new. Doc fell in love with Clara, the kind schoolteacher played by Mary Steenburgen. Their romance added a softer side to his character, and it led to Lloyd's first ever on-screen kiss. For an actor whose career had been built on comedy and unusual characters, this was a new kind of challenge. The kiss felt tender and genuine, showing audiences that even a man as strange as Doc Brown could find love. But not every memorable moment was so sweet. Some came dangerously close to disaster. During the filming of Part 3, Michael J. Fox nearly lost his life. In one scene, Mad Dog Tannen and his gang try to hang Marty. It was supposed to be a carefully rehearsed stunt, but something went wrong. The rope actually cut off Fox's air supply, and he was left swinging unconscious for several seconds before the crew realized what was happening. Thankfully, they caught it in time, and he survived. Later, Fox admitted in his memoir, Lucky Man, how terrifying that moment was. What audiences see as just another tense scene in the movie was, in reality, a brush with death. The dangers on set weren't only physical. There were also fiery creative clashes. Crispin Glover, who played George McFly in the first film, was passionate about his character and had strong opinions about how he should act. During one heated moment, he argued with director Robert Zemeckis over whether his character should use a broomstick in a scene. The fight grew so loud that other cast members hid in their dressing rooms to avoid getting caught in the middle. Michael J. Fox later recalled peeking out of his room and seeing Christopher Lloyd doing the same, both silently relieved that the conflict had nothing to do with them. Glover's intensity showed how much he cared about his role, but it also created friction that became part of the film's behind-the-scenes legend. But the chaos of filming was nothing compared to the strange what-ifs. Alternative scripts, almost cast actors, and wild directions the sequels nearly took. Alternate futures and forgotten details. In the early drafts of Part 2, the time machine was not going to the year 2015 at all. Instead, the plan was to travel back to the 1960s. Lorraine was imagined as a free-spirited flower child who even ended up in jail, and Doc Brown was going to be shown experimenting with substances. It would have been a completely different movie, one that leaned more into the counterculture of the decade. In the end, Robert Zemeckis decided to go another way, returning the characters to the events of the first film, but from a new perspective. That choice gave us one of the most unique sequels in film history. Casting also had its share of what-ifs. Christopher Lloyd is now impossible to separate from the role of Doc Brown, but he was not the only name on the table. Jeff Goldblum was seriously considered. His quirky style and unusual energy might have created a very different version of Doc. There were even talks about John Lithgow. Imagine for a moment a world where Goldblum was the one shouting about 1.21 gigawatts. It shows how close the trilogy came to having a completely different face at the center of it. Even with the casting settled, the films carried plenty of small, factual errors and odd moments that fans continue to pick apart. In one scene, Doc talks about setting the DeLorean to December 25th, year 0000, to witness the birth of Christ. Historians know that Jesus was likely born around 4 BC, and there is no year 000 in the calendar at all. It goes directly from 1 BC to 1 AD. The line was meant as a joke, but it still confused anyone paying close attention. Another mistake appears when Doc handles plutonium. In reality,
Safe now. Everything's lead-lined.
plutonium is a silvery metal, but in the film, it is shown as a glowing red liquid in a glass tube. There is also Marty's casual reference to watching the Honeymooners episode, The Man from Space, on November 5th, 1955. That episode didn't actually air until December. The real episode for that date was The Sleepwalker. These details might sound small, but for fans who watch closely, they stand out. In the end, these imperfections only made Back to the Future more beloved. Fans delight in spotting them, sharing them, and debating which is the funniest or strangest. The trilogy was never flawless, but that is exactly what gives it charm. It feels alive, human, and full of the little quirks that make stories last across generations. Did you catch these bloopers early on or only later? Share your thoughts in the comments.